Great. Well, that's it for the challenges. So just wanted to kind of open it up to the group.
This is Craig. There are a few questions on the chat. Chad asked if you have any plans to expand the membership stream, what the near future looks like. Stephen asked, would group spaces be useful for NAMEN's community practice? And that sounds like an online tool. And then the next question that was on the chat was what meeting methods seem to be the most productive, face-to-face, web conferences, and other. Was there an approach that seemed to be most productive?
I'll start with the plans to expand the membership.
Yep.
So because this community of practice was associated with a funding, like with a call for proposals in a particular funding stream, it technically is coming to an end now. But we're, as part of our project wrap up and evaluation and analysis, we're looking at what else could we do to sustain the community of practice and what future iterations it could take. Our government is currently looking at developing a federal plan to address gender-based violence. So we're hoping that we're going to do a little bit of waiting as well to see what kinds of priorities come out through that plan and see what kinds of opportunities there are to build on this work and to establish a more sustainable and long-term community of practice in Canada.
If I could just ask a follow-up question. Was the intent of the funding to seed a community of practice, or was it just to kind of analyze the process of developing a community of practice?
Well, it was both. Primarily to provide a space and an opportunity for funded organizations to come together and to share and to build this joint evaluation framework, but to provide the beginnings of a more long-term community of practice, because there is no such thing in Canada. We have some local, provincial, territorial types of networks that are focused on, for example, shelters or on sexual violence prevention, supporting survivors, but nothing that's focused on primary prevention and engaging that voice. So yeah, we're looking for looking at the sustainability question right now and see what, because for us it's a resource issue as well. It takes funds to continue to do this kind of work, and so we need to explore that.
And looking on the chat here, would group spaces be useful for NAMEN? From my experience, it was really great. It's an easy way to share tools and resources. There's a group discussion piece. So from my experience, it was a great tool. So you can just look that up online. There's lots of information on group spaces.
And also what I would say is that Wild Apricot may serve that purpose, so we should explore that tool further. We already have a membership. Now I'm putting on my NAMEN hat. I am saying we as in NAMEN. So I think we can look at that a little bit closer and see if it could fit or fill the same kind of needs that group spaces fills.
So it has more capabilities than Zoom does, in other words?
Group spaces is comparable to Wild Apricot. I would say Wild Apricot is even more robust in that it includes a membership database, it includes communications, it includes payment facilities.
Okay.
So I think we have the same kind of tools within Wild Apricot, and we should explore that further if that's an interest for the NAMEN community.
Great. And then I'm losing some of the chat stuff here. Debbie has to go, it looks like. Thank you, Debbie. What was the other one here that we're looking at?
Oh, I said thank you while I was muted. Bye, darling.
Thank you, Debbie.
Bye, Debbie. Thank you. So what meeting methods seem to be most productive? Face-to-face, web conferences, calls, others? Combination of both, all of them? What worked for you?
Yeah, I think our in-person meetings with project partners was definitely the most meaningful. But again, our partners didn't have the opportunity to meet each other. So, you know, White Ribbon was able to build those individual relationships with organizations, and that was really critical and important. But I think web conferences were great at, you know, kind of seeing where people were at, you know, being able to connect on, you know, particular challenge they're having or success. So yeah, I think it's a mix of different methods. It kind of depends on what you want to get out of the communication.
Good point. I wonder about, so the thing is, one of the things that was interesting to me was your principles around collaborative leadership, right? Not top-down, white ribbon thing, but collaborating with all these communities, and how the fact that you had differing levels of understanding around male socialization and toxic masculinities and gender-based violence. How did those two come together? The shared leadership, collaborative leadership, and then but differing understandings of the issue. Was that fairly messy?
It was at times messy. So, for example, we kind of, in identifying the shared values, we, you know, discussed using the term pro-feminist men's organizing, and you know, wanted to be clear about, you know, the political nature of this work, right? And so there were some that really weren't comfortable with it, some that were, and at the end of the day, we landed on, you know, these terms of reference are for us. So let's you know, go with pro-feminist men's organizing, and yeah, but it was a bit of a challenge, but I think this is where growth happens, and you know, how we can support each other as practitioners as well. And the COP was really to get at that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I have kind of a related question, if it's okay to jump in here. I'm really interested in that same conversation, but around the outcomes that you developed. And I'm wondering if you'd be willing to talk a little bit about kind of the nuts and bolts of the process you use to identify outcomes and indicators across your really diverse programs. And yeah, how did you tackle that?
Sure, so more of the development of the evaluation framework. Great. So we initially did a literature review, working with some evaluation consultants here as well. So looking at how this work is being evaluated currently. So that's also on our website. So we did our literature review. We then looked at all of the existing evaluation plans and frameworks across our 9 partners. And then gave that to our evaluation consultant and said kind of, okay, this is where folks are at and they're thinking and planning. And then a first draft was developed based on those different frameworks. And then we had, I would say, 12 rounds of revisions on the tool, and really kind of a rewrite as well of how to make this accessible.
Yeah, and I would also add that we were lucky that the funder, first of all, required every project to include an evaluation, provided some funds for that said evaluation, which often, you know, both of those conditions are missing from funding frameworks. And also the funder provided some common outcomes that they expected out of all the projects, which was really interesting. And we, White Ribbon, was fortunate that we were able to provide inputs to the funder prior to their development of that call for proposal. So we made some suggestions in terms of the kinds of outcomes that are sort of commonly understood in our area of work to engage men and boys. So that's something that was considered from the get-go by funder and by all of the organizations. So when we came on board to look at existing outcomes, we found a lot of commonalities amongst all the funded organizations.
That makes sense. Thank you.
Humberto and Kate, are you willing to share about the sort of levels of funding we're talking about for each of the participants? Was it as much as a staff person or something much less? You all still hooked up?
I'm sorry, can you repeat that?
Are you able to hear us, Humberto? Your connection's a little weak.
Clear.
Can you hear me?
I'll ask the question in
Humberto?
chat. How's that? I'll chat it and you can take it from there.
Humberto and Kate, are you still with us? We may have lost them. Can't hear you, Craig.
Yeah, I turned off my mic. I was just typing the question.
Okay, very good. And I'm sure Humberto and Kate will rejoin here. Hopefully they're, oh, perhaps they're back on now. Just coming in.
I don't know if you can hear us. I think there's some...
Just barely kind of in and out, Humberto. We cannot hear you now. Your name is on my screen. So I was curious.
Can you hear us now? Can you hear us?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay, great. So the question here, what level of funding was provided to your COP members as much as a staff person, more or less? So this
That's too bad.
From member to member. Some organizations got a full-time equivalent to be divvied up, right? So depending on the resources, depending on how well the resources, some of them were able to dedicate the full, and others had to kind of divide the funding between the project manager and the, for example, executive director, because in some cases that's all that organization had.
Well, we lost a substantial amount of what you had mentioned, Humberto. We did hear the last part of what you said regarding some of it had to be shared because of some of these programs at very low financial capacities, right? And others were, is it true that others were able to hire someone specific to this project? Was there enough money to do that for some of the programs?
Yes. So the funder provided staffing funds. So each project had a budget line for staffing. But depending on how well the organization was resourced, some organizations were able to, for example, use all of those funds to hire a project manager for their project, while others had to divide those funds between a project manager and, for example, covering their portion of the executive director, because that's all they had.
How did you manage all these differences in all these different 9 pilot communities as coordinating body? How did you do that internally? I mean, how did you, and externally, how did you manage all this?
Well, I would say it's a combination of a lot of patience, a lot of recognition of the different levels that organizations are resourced to do this work, and therefore a great deal of understanding on our part. If members were not able to, for example, provide the level of inputs and contributes within the time frame that we required, a lot of flexibility. We did our own rejigging of our budget lines, and we shared some of our funds with the organizations to help them increase their participation. We reduced the amount of traveling that we had planned in order to do that. So we redistributed the resources, and then we worked with what we within the confines of what we had. So we were very responsive. Again, flexibility was key, and Kate's amazing relationship building and follow up individually with organizations, a lot of phone calling and individual relationship building. All of those things were important to address that kind of diversity and to address the resource scarcity issue.
That's great. And I think there's also just a coordination element too. So I wanted to make sure I was in the know of everyone's projects across the board. So I'd have a pretty thorough kind of Excel spreadsheet where I would try and look at commonalities of target participants and where folks are at. So it was a great deal of background and research and just tracking throughout as well. But I think the diversity really made it a stronger COP, and
And when you say diversity, what do you mean by that term?
Yeah, I think just the different program models, target participants, so from Indigenous young men participating in Winnipeg to communities in Whitehorse to Francophone newcomer communities in New Brunswick.
Wow.
So it's just an incredible scope of folks participating in projects, which I think really excited our COP members just to see the wide scope of work.
And also, I would say diversity in the sense of resources, right? Some of these organizations were very small, very local, very, some of them had 2 staff members, as an example, right? So diversity in the sense of resources too.
If you did this again with the same amount of funding, would you reduce the number of communities you did it with, or would you do the same again? Like, would you go to 6 communities instead of 9, or would you just go, no, I'd do the same thing?
It's hard to say. My gut instinct would be to add even more, like to open it up for even more participants. And then to follow on the recommendation to have different levels of membership and to engage people in different ways, right? So maybe it's a smaller group that works on the evaluation framework, and maybe it's another smaller group that works on the toolkits, and so I would look for opportunities to diversify even further.
Oh, really?
Very, very deliberate in terms of how they're engaged.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
I've got a question. How much argument was there about what the objectives or the evaluation questions were going to be, or what I know that you said some outcome measures were brought in by the funder, but were people arguing about what the priorities were because the priorities were different or whatnot? I mean, where were the arguments? I guess I'm curious. If you're willing to share.
I don't think there were many arguments, and folks are pretty understanding of, you know, what works in my community won't necessarily work in yours. So there was definitely a respect there.
Yeah, and also the way that we built this framework is like I said earlier, it's like a menu, right?
Yeah.
So no one project included all of those outcomes and all of those indicators. So the framework is really like an amalgamation of everybody's outcomes and indicators. So as long as people felt like theirs were included in the framework, then it was okay. So everybody had a piece to contribute to it. Does that make sense? So that's not where, you know, our arguments took place. I think that the areas where we ran into challenges was, again, I think at the beginning, like agreeing on those shared values, right, on the terms of reference. So there was a lot of back and forth, but it's all good. Like it wasn't conflict based. It was more, you know, there's a lot of different thoughts and different ways of you know, thinking about these issues, and it's so then it's a matter of kind of facilitating, finding common ground amongst everybody, right?
Yeah. Were you sussing out any differences in cultural frameworks, like people had different cultural starting points?
Yeah,
ways?
absolutely. Yeah, that was a big piece. And we have one organization, one Indigenous focused organization, Paktutiik Inuit Women of Canada. So meeting with them in the first year was just so incredible to learn about kind of the multiple layers of trauma that Inuit men, women, and girls are facing, and just the historical context and how that shapes their approach, their very unique approach, and there's 6 principles that they work with. Yeah, so I think for White Ribbon, that was just so incredible for us to deepen our understanding of specific communities and their challenges.
And that was one organization that had significant challenges in participation and resources. So that is a gap in our community of practice and in our tools, as well as that I wish there was stronger representation of Indigenous perspectives and understanding in the different tools that we developed.
So they're one of the groups that was underfunded.
Absolutely. So they're Inuit organizations. So they represent Indigenous populations in the north of Canada, primarily expensive territory. Yeah. You know, and one of, I think, 6 national Indigenous organizations, and with you know, tremendous underfunding. I think the team was 2 or 3 people in total for the organization. So again, perfect example of that challenge, you know, and then it had an impact on our ability to be completely intersectional in the case of Indigenous perspectives and accessibility as well.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
I'm curious to hear more about, you mentioned that the one Indigenous organization had principles. I'm wondering if that's also something you included in your kind of evaluation framework, and feel free to go tell me to do my homework and read the framework again, but I'm wondering to what extent the project surfaced kind of shared or unique principles of programming implementation in addition to the kind of change outcomes that you then tried to assess or that were useful to across programs. Does that make sense?
Yeah, and I think this could really be adapted to the questions that the communities are based on. So I think we speak a little bit about just how important the context is and really positioning the framework, but I do think it falls short in terms of specific Indigenous indicators and outcomes and what have you. So this is, yeah, more for adaptation by
Thank you.
Much differences between the East Coast and the Prairie?
Oh yeah.
Is that fairly? Huh?
Oh yeah, absolutely.
Well, even in the projects themselves, right?
Yeah.
Like the activities and
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. I learned that travel in February in the East Coast is maybe not the best idea, but yeah, much more of like a strong community development perspective and commitment in the East Coast that emerged there.
yeah. So the projects tended to be small in scale but deeper.
Yeah.
So they tended to work with like groups of men on a longer term, whereas the projects in the prairies tended to be like farther reaching. So the one in Alberta was like working with workplaces and with sports and in different locations throughout the province. The project in Winnipeg in Manitoba had to do with urban youth, so again reaching far and wide into that population. Also with a significant Indigenous youth population there too, using art and music. Yeah, so and the other project in the East Coast had to do with supporting newcomer communities, so immigrant and refugee communities in the East Coast. So it included that dimension as well. Now, Students' Commission of Canada also had an initiative in the East Coast working with incarcerated youth. So again, going more in depth with groups of youth in the justice system over a long period of time. There's some really great lessons learned from that experience.
And these different projects are available on your website. If we wanted to look and see what they do in Nova Scotia, what they do in Winnipeg, what they do in the Yukon, that's on your website. We could see that.
Yeah, so that's going to be featured in the toolkit.
Okay.
We're launching that next week. So you can check out, each organization has their own case study. So all the info is there, the tools they've created, resources, that's all profiled. And then everyone's contact information across the different programs.
That's great. And the TORs and needs assessment, evaluation, is that all those tools available as well?
I'd be happy
that you created?
I'd be happy to share the terms of reference, the initial needs assessment questionnaire. Yeah, I'm happy to do that.
Wow, that's great. That's really great. How about others? Other questions or comments about this?
Hi, this is Stephen. I was wondering if you see a role for NAMEN in the future of this community of practice.
Absolutely. I mean, we're looking at, again, NAMEN, we're looking at developing our own, right? So in this webinar is part of that too. Totally. I think that's, we at White Ribbon, we're interested in reaching out to more and more Canadian-based organizations and inviting them to participate within NAMEN as well. So that would be, we would be happy to extend the invitation to the COP members to join NAMEN and continue that kind of collaboration within its COP. But again, what we're going to find the same kind of challenges around resourcing and participation that we're already seeing in NAMEN. Canadian-based organizations are not, but yeah, we'd be happy to make those links.
For me, some of the biggest challenge in doing this is the depth versus breadth piece, right? Which is kind of what we're trying to sort out here as we go forward. Is how do we get into the depth of some of these key pieces? I think some of the questions you're asking, Aaron, is really going there, right? Around just how did you develop this? How did you come with these outcomes? And others have mentioned, how did you work these outcomes out with others with different understandings of or different needs, you know? So it is, I think that's the biggest challenge on this kind of a environment of exchange.
And I would love to hear, maybe you know, how people felt the benefits were to them to participate. You know, what they feel they want to continue doing now that it's ending. What would they want to continue doing?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that was really our approach throughout the project of, you know, having this being a mutually beneficial process. So, you know, building leadership capacity and you know, what are folks interested in learning about, and, you know, reaching out to speakers to address it. Yeah. We're kind of thinking it through of what it could look like going forward. And again, I think it's a resource question. But on an immediate basis, I'm creating just a Google Drive of everyone's resources and publications and sharing that with everyone, making sure we have each other's contacts. And I think we do have some strong interest from a couple organizations for going forward. It's just a matter of, again, the resources and objectives, and yeah, the scope. How to do, you know, does it make more sense to have a locally based COP or broaden? Again, goes back to the objectives, right, of what people want to accomplish. So we'll see. We'll see, right. And I think with the launch of the toolkit next week, right. You know, we'll see that go far and wide, and maybe some new ideas generated from the sector.
That's great.
I'm just noticing one person on our conferences doesn't have a video. Is that you, Rob Oken, by any chance?
Yeah, my Zoom lost its Zoom.
Do you have any questions you want to throw in?
This has been fascinating, but I feel a little bit challenged by not having the visuals. But you know, I'm good, and I'm really appreciative of how this seems to be something that NAMEN can do, you know, and broadcast and keep these kinds of conversations going, so we can, you know, both be understanding what others are doing and then making it available. I mean, this was a great use of our service.
And Rob, we can send you the PowerPoint if yeah, we'll send that to you for sure.
Oh, okay. Yeah, I don't know how it went down. I used it recently, no problem. So I would have liked to have seen all of your smiling faces.
Well, hopefully you can look at the recording and check us out that way.
You'll see how we all smiled when you said, you know, nice to see your smiling faces, and we all smiled. Right. So there you go. The other thing that's interesting about this process, and learning from your experiences and our collective experiences, is that as we attempt to grow this community of practice, and figure out the structure and the processes of doing that, the same thing is happening on the global level. MENA-Engage Global Alliance is actually working with all the networks. So South America, South Asia, Africa, Europe, MENA, Middle East, Northern Africa, to look at how they can do this kind of community practice as well. And again, increase our capacities to actually move this into our communities and into our areas of work, and engage others in this process. So I think this is really useful in this beginning of this process of doing this and trying to sort out what works and what's effective. And some of that goes to some of what you're talking about, Stephen, too, about some kind of evaluation and some kind of discussion about what worked, what doesn't work, and how do we make this engaging and really useful for people.
Yeah, I think this is a really valuable, I echo what Rob said, it's so valuable to be able to interact with each other. And there is something about seeing each other's faces that I think helps to build the community part of community of practice. And I'm curious if when you did your quarterly meetings, were you doing video conferencing? That's a question.
Yeah, not everyone has to hear there, but yeah, it wasn't for all members. Yeah, people have different kind of familiarity with tech and yeah.
I guess I'm thinking that it makes a difference, and I'm curious about that. You know, whether it really does in terms of building something that is sustainable and feeds us in terms of the kind of connection that we tend to look for in that community of practice environment.
No, good question. So I'm aware of time, and we have about a minute left, and just wanted to open up for any last questions or comments from anyone before we close out the session.
I just wanted to reflect on my experience actually with this web conference, which has been great. My concept of a community of practice is pretty distinct from my concept of an implementation of practice. And it sounds like, I only slowly realized over the course of the conference that you were actually doing both. And so I think that it would be interesting to see if other people have that same distinction as you kind of roll out your toolkit and as you roll out the concept, because a community of practice is, the way I conceptualize it is really, a collaborative communication between people who are doing their own practices in other places, and it sounds like you're fostering both. And so, so people might, people like me, I guess, might, have different expectations of what they're going to be engaging in or learning about when you tell them that you're going to talk to them about a community of practice. And so I think that might just be interesting for you to know, since your use of the phrase community of practice is a little different than I think some people's experience of it.
Do you mind, just because of time now, Chad, that's great. I'm glad you brought that up. Could you send me something or send us something about how you define those differences? Because I haven't heard that before, so that's very interesting.
Sure. Well, community of practice is a sociologically studied thing in workplace sociology. And so, so there's actually several good books about community of practice. And actually Prevent Connect the model for Prevent Connect is based on those studies of mostly workplace-driven communities of practice. And like the Army has a whole model focused on community of practices, communities of practice. And so, yeah, I can find those and send you the idea of community of practice. And then implementation, the implementation of programming, even kind of very broad-based programming like you're doing, at least in my grant experience, is usually framed in a different way. So.
Okay, great.
Great. Yeah, what are we doing? Good.
Any last?
Thank you. I want to say thank you. Kate and Humberto, it's a big project. You've been at it for a long time, some years, right? And congratulations on coming up with product. It's always the hard part sometimes.
Thanks so much for your generosity and sharing your products and your process and all of that. It's really, really helpful.
Yeah, thank you very much.
Yeah, I agree. It's very, very useful. So we will, so thank you again, Humberto and Kate as well. And we'll be having further conversations about our next community of practice event in perhaps December or January. We'll see. So thanks a lot for all of your input. Great conversations. Really appreciate it. And we will see you on the next event.
Chuck.
Thanks, Chuck. Thanks, everyone.
Great. Bye.
Bye-bye.
See you all.